Make your way over in your Bibles to the book of Ecclesiastes, if you will. We're studying the life of Solomon, and of course part of the study that we're doing involves kind of studying things through chronological order, in the order that they happen. So since we studied about the death of Solomon, I think it's appropriate to study probably the book that he wrote toward the end of his life. And I thought about, I've got so much writing on my paper. We're covering a whole book tonight. I want to remind everybody of that. But I've got so much writing on my paper, I thought about taking a picture of it and posting it on Facebook and putting a poll up as to who thinks we'll get through it or not. But I didn't do that because I thought, well, somebody might try to cheat off that, and I don't want to get I don't want to make it easy on you guys. But I might take a picture of it, post it afterward, just so you can look at it and see what we got to go through tonight. We've got a monumental task before us, and that is to try to sum up the book of Ecclesiastes as best as we can, and at least take away, I think, the main point from it. So we're going to jump right into our lesson here in question number 1. And the first question, again, is a question to kind of get our minds turning here and thinking along the lines that we're pursuing. And the question is, what is one thing to you that makes life worth living? And I know we'd probably all immediately start talking about spiritual things, but I want you to think about it from a physical standpoint, just from an earthly standpoint. What is one thing for you about this life that makes life enjoyable or worth living?
All the different seasons of life.
Okay.
From being young, being, and all the developmental things that happen there, and then, getting married, having a family, and being grandparents, et cetera, all the stages.
So just life in general, the growth, the process of life itself. What else? What would anybody else say? Love? Okay. That certainly makes life enjoyable, doesn't it? What else can you think of? Anything else pop out? Family? I think when you think about it from a purely physical standpoint, it's obviously going to be something, whatever makes our life worth living is going to be something that motivates us, something that makes us want to get up in the morning, something that makes life enjoyable, pleasurable, that we get satisfaction from. And it's kind of interesting when you look at mankind in general. Statistics tell us that there are more addicts today than ever before, and by that I mean there are more drug addicts than there ever been before. There's more alcoholics. There's more drug addicts themselves. There's more gambling addictions than there's ever been before. There's more pornography addictions than there's ever been before. And why do you think that is? You ever stop to think about that?
Because there's more people.
Sir?
There's more people.
There's more people? Okay. Yeah. When you think about, why people do the things that they do and why they're pursuing these things, they're looking for something to bring meaning to their life, aren't they? They're looking for something to bring satisfaction, to bring pleasure, to make life enjoyable for them. And the reason, why are people doing things like that? Why are we looking for enjoyment and meaning in life?
I think we live in a time where people are pursuing immediate gratification more than any in history. We want everything right now. We want it all immediately and whatever it is. And so we're looking for shortcuts to feel good, make some drugs.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement. And why do you think that is? Why are people looking for enjoyment in life?
We're getting farther away from God. They lost hope.
Okay. God has made us in a way, and I don't know who first said this, but I think it's a good statement to think about. But he said there's a God-shaped hole inside of our heart. In other words, God's made us incomplete without Him. And so what we as humans, all of us have that hole in our heart, and what we're trying to do is fill that hole, fill that void. Of course, the only thing that's going to fill it and satisfy it is God, but people are looking to fill that void, and so they turn to all these other avenues, basically trying to find something that's going to fill it. And the conclusion, that's really the book of Ecclesiastes. That's what the book of Ecclesiastes is all about. And the conclusion that Solomon gets to is everything is meaningless. If you're talking about earthly things and you're trying to fill that hole, that void in your life with earthly things, you're not going to find it here. All these things are empty. So, just think about the book of Ecclesiastes in that way. And we'll read a little bit and try to develop it as we go. And I don't know, we'll see how far we get. Somebody read the first 3 verses for us there of Ecclesiastes 1.
The words of the preacher, son of David, king of Jerusalem. Vanity, vanity, saith the preacher. Vanity, vanity, all vanity. What profit hath man from all his labor, which he toiled under the sun?
Okay, so question number 2 is, who wrote this chapter/book? There's really three descriptions that are given here in verse 1, right? What are they? What's the first one? Yeah, the preacher is the first one. And so what do you think of when you think of a preacher? What does that mean?
Somebody who knows the word and helps you to understand the word.
Okay. Anybody else? A teacher? Okay. When I think of the idea of a preacher, I think of more of a public declaration, than maybe sitting down in private with somebody. Somebody who stands up before a crowd and proclaims a message. And so the first description that we have here, these are the words of the preacher. Somebody who's standing up before everybody. Somebody who's addressing others and teaching others. And it's interesting, the title of the book, Ecclesiastes, it's pretty good parallel to the Greek word. Do you recognize the Greek word from that? Ecclesia, right? You heard that word before? Sometimes we talk about it in the New Testament in relation to the church. That's generally how it's translated by the word church. But what does the word ecclesia mean?
Called out.
Yeah, it's not, it's not a word in the Bible that's used exclusively of the church. It just generally means an assembly, a group of people who have been called out for a purpose. Now, that is a good description of the church, but it's also a description of just a general assembly in the Bible sometimes. And so if you think about it, the book Ecclesiastes itself, from that standpoint, Solomon is calling people out. He's calling a group of people out for a particular purpose, and that is to preach them a message, to deliver to them a message that he has. And so the first description is preacher. What's the second one? Son of David. And of course, David, spiritually speaking, was the greatest king of Israel. Physically, it would have been Solomon, but spiritually, it was David. So he identifies himself as a descendant of David. What's the third description? Okay, king in Jerusalem. So, who do you know that was a son of David, a king in Jerusalem, and a man that was filled with wisdom, imparted advice to other people? I mean, it's pretty obvious to me that the writer of the book has to be Solomon. And it's not just the introduction itself when you're looking at it, but it's also the idea when you read through the book. It's clear that this person was a person who had tremendous wisdom. They had unparalleled knowledge. They had great authority, and they had finances, they had riches like you could only imagine. And so when you couple that idea with this guy was a son of David and a king in Jerusalem, I mean, who fits that description? It has to be Solomon, doesn't it? And so a lot of people believe that this is the book that Solomon wrote toward the end of his life. We read about how when he was older, his wives turned away his heart from God. But a lot of people believe this is kind of as Solomon is growing toward the end of his days, that this is kind of the declaration of his life that he's giving to all people. So number 3 here, what sweeping statement does Solomon make about life here in verse 2? Yeah, it's vanity, right? It's vain, it's empty. And again, think about what Solomon's writing about here. It's not that there's no meaning in life itself, but he's writing about everything fails to fill that hole inside us. You know, when you think about the earthly things, there's nothing here in this world that's going to bring us total satisfaction. And so he kind of introduces his subject, and the word vanity, it just simply means vapor or breath or wind. You know, it's the idea of some people say, well, it's something of no value, but it doesn't have any substance. You know, you can't grab a hold of it, you can't hang on to it. And when he says vanity of vanities, you remember we talked about the phrase Lord of Lords and King of Kings last week? What does vanity of vanities mean? Well, it's the greatest vanity of all, right? It's the greatest emptiness of all. And so when people try to take earthly things and fill that void in their heart, in their life, that comes from not knowing and worshiping God, it's the most meaningless life that you can live. It's the emptiest kind of life that you can have here upon this earth. And so what does Solomon do? Solomon sets out, well, let's go to number 4 here. What question does Solomon ask?
What profit has a man?
Yeah, what does a man profit from all his labor here upon earth? Right, all this physical things, these physical things that we do here upon this earth. And Solomon does this research, and he experiments with all these things, and he gains experience. And you know, part of what Solomon is writing about, we talk about how Solomon had tremendous wisdom, but it blows our minds that he could pursue the course that he did. But it's really the mistakes that Solomon made in life, you know, and what he learned from them. And whether we like it or not, one of the ways that we learn is through making mistakes. It may be one of the best ways that we learn is through making mistakes. And so Solomon is giving his 2 cents or his evaluation of what happens or what people try to do when they fill that hole in their heart with meaningless things. So what profit does a man gain from all his labor under the sun? Think about that. How many people, well, I won't ask you if you're a hard worker, but how many people know hard workers in this life? Right? So what does a man profit? I mean, he works hard all of his life. And, you know, he gains all these physical possessions, and maybe he builds a big bank account, and then he dies. And what happens to all those things that he's worked so hard for here upon this earth? It's the most meaningless life you can live, right? It's a life that is void of any purpose. And so what does a man profit if he works hard all of his life here upon this earth and gains all these things? Vanity. It's the greatest vanity that a person can experience. You know, one of the things that the Bible teaches us, and it's hard sometimes to get that idea through our head, but we're not permanent residents here, right? We're just passing through. We're just sojourning. And so our goal is to move on into another world. But I think sometimes as Christians, and I know as you look at the world, you see that attitude, people kind of think, we're going to be here a long time. You know, we need this and we need that. And in the end, you're going to leave it all behind. So just to pursue those physical things in life is one of the most meaningless lives that a person can live. It's one of the most emptiest lives that a person can have here upon this earth. So let's go down to verse 8 here. I know I got verse 9 on our sheets, but somebody read verses 8 through 10 for us, chapter 1.
All things are full of labor, man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. The thing that hath been is that thing which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done. There is no new thing under the sun. Is there anything whereof it may be said, see, this is new? It hath already of old time, which was before us.
Okay, so Solomon's talking about this emptiness, meaningless life. And you notice in verse 8, he talks about how it's full of labor, and yet the eye is not satisfied, and the ear, he says, or the ear is not filled with hearing. In other words, when a person goes out and makes physical things under the sun, his focus, his purpose in life, does his eye ever say, I've seen enough? You know, does his ear ever say, I've heard enough? You know, your eyes or your ears can never get enough. And that's what Solomon is talking about here, the vain pursuit of earthly things. You're never going to be satisfied. You're never going to be in a state where you feel fulfilled in this life. You're always going to want more and more. And so he talks about, remember, compare that with spiritual things, okay? Jesus said, you remember in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, blessed are they who hunger and thirst after righteousness. You remember the end of it? Why? They'll be filled, right? They'll be satisfied. You think about some of the other passages in the Bible. One of them I had written down here. Well, John 4:13. You remember when Jesus runs into the woman at Jacob's well, the Samaritan woman, and he told her, whosoever drinks of this water, what? Going to be thirsty again, right? You can never be fully satisfied with earthly things. They'll never fill you up. So the eye will never be full. The ear will never be full of hearing. And when you think about our world, what fuels our economy today?
Greed.
Okay, money.
Constant buying.
Yeah, new, right? Are people, do they ever get to a point where they say, this is good enough? You know, let's just stop right here. Let's not do anything else. Everything that you see is always new and improved, right? And so it's this drive, you know, to create something new. But in the end, your eyes never full. Your ears are never full of hearing. Your eyes are never full of seeing. It's always something more and more. And so people are never fully satisfied. They always want more. It's never enough. And then he talks about, in verse 9 here, he talks about that or the thing that hath been is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done. And then he makes this statement, there's nothing new under the sun. And what is Solomon talking about there by that statement, do you think? Okay, what is life? How would you describe life? It's brief, okay.
Changing.
It's changing, but how do you think about it from Solomon, his standpoint, when he said, the thing that hath been is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done? What does that describe to you? Routine, right? And think about life, how routine life is. Right? We go home, we go to bed, all of us get up in the morning. You're a breakfast person, you're going to eat some breakfast, go take a shower and get ready, and what are you going to do?
Same thing every day.
You're going to go to work, right? Why are you going to go to work? Got to make some money, right? Got to eat, don't you? You need some food. Why do you need some food?
So you get back up.
Physical strength, right? Got to sustain your body. And then, what do you do after that? Go to bed and you start all over again, right? You need physical strength so you can go back to work. So he's talking about the routine life. Think about a person who pursues earthly things. Does their life ever change? I mean, every day it's the same, isn't it? You wake up, you go through the same routine, and you end up, there's nothing new under the sun. This is a person's life, and in the end, it's all meaningless and it's all vain. So, Solomon talks about, let's go down to, somebody read verses 16 through 18 for us here in chapter 1.
I commune with my heart, saying, look, I have attained greatness, and have gained more wisdom than all who are before me in Jerusalem. My heart has understood great wisdom and knowledge, and I set my heart to know wisdom, and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is grasping for the wind. For in much wisdom is much grief,
Okay, so what does Solomon commit himself to? What worldly thing first? He's trying to fill this hole, this void in his life, right? What's he going to fill it with? Yeah, the pursuit of wisdom. Well, didn't God make Solomon a wise man? Didn't he give him understanding? So why is Solomon pursuing wisdom? Or maybe I should ask, how is Solomon pursuing wisdom?
Everything he thought would make him happy.
Well, how do you get smarter? You just wake up in the morning and
Knowledge, you constantly learn.
yeah, you study, right? You study. You read books. You take classes. And so what did Solomon do? Solomon had already been given this amazing wisdom by God, but he also studied. And he gained as much knowledge as he could as was possible. He increased his intellect. He increased his understanding just like we would do today. And notice that he didn't stop in just, things that were accepted as normal. He talks about, in verse 17, he gave his heart to know madness and folly. What does that mean? Even things that people would think you're crazy for studying and pursuing, Solomon did those things. He studied the absurdities of life. And he studied out all the foolish things that some people wouldn't even give any attention to. So when you think about Solomon, again, when Solomon did something, he did. He didn't just go halfway. He studied everything that he possibly could study. And what did he know?
For all that wisdom, there's a certain amount of grief that comes along with that. And increased knowledge increases sorrow a lot of times.
Yes. And why is that?
You know what will happen.
Yeah. Yeah, all those degrees. I mean, you think about people, how many degrees can you get in the world today? I don't know. But you get every degree in the world that they have. You could pursue all the education that you could possibly get. You could read every book in the world. You could write your own books. Solomon did all those things. And in the end, he says, it's all meaningless. Solomon was the smartest man alive. Has anybody ever gained any more knowledge here upon this earth than Solomon gained? No. Nobody ever will. So he gave himself to the fullest pursuit of knowledge and wisdom. And in the end, he said all these things are nothing but meaningless. They weren't satisfying, and they just increased his grief, because what happens when you learn all these things? Well, some of the things you learn, you can't do, right? I mean, you can't do everything in life. There are just some limits that we have, physically speaking. And what comes with the responsibility of knowledge? Yeah, doing what's right, doing what you know to be right. And when you think about what you can gain, Solomon gained as much as is humanly possible. And so his conclusion was, none of this is going to make me happy. None of it is going to fill this hole or this void in my heart. Sometimes whenever you go and you learn, if you're like me, you forget. You ever do that? How many people studied a foreign language when they were in school, right? Do you know a lot of that you studied?
You can order 2 tacos.
Well, at least he won't go hungry, I guess. So you look back and you say, that was a waste, right? Because everything that I learned, I forgot. That's just the human mind. So there were some things, even in the pursuit of knowledge, there are some things that we just cannot know, right? There's some questions that we cannot answer, no matter how much we may study, no matter how much education we may gain. And the point is, we're never going to reach a point where we know everything. We're never going to reach a point where we're omniscient like God. And so in the end, it's all empty. It's all meaningless. It doesn't bring purpose to your life. So we're going to have to speed up here. So I'm not going to read verses 1 through 11 here in chapter 2. But if you read ahead, what's the next thing that Solomon does? Think about what Solomon has attained, right? The first pursuit was wisdom. And so at this point, Solomon's a king, wrote some things down here. He's an author, he's a songwriter, he's a lecturer, he's a politician, he's a judge, he's a military commander, he's an economist, he's a botanist, he's a horticulturalist, he's a zoologist, he's a biologist, he's a philosopher, all these educations. He's gained all these things. They didn't make him happy. So now what does Solomon pursue? Pleasure, right? He says, I'm going to resume this experiment, and the pursuit, the emptiness that I'm going to try to fill in my heart is going to be tried to fill with pleasure. Again, what he finds out is pleasure is pointless. And, you know, the pleasure doesn't stay. It doesn't mean that he didn't get some pleasure from the things that he did, but it wasn't lasting pleasure. And so it'll fill you for a little while, and then you got to turn right around and do it again, right? So some of the things that he tries and experiments with. Number 9. What were one of the things he tried? Look at verse 3.
Wine.
Yeah, wine. How many people today pursue pleasure in alcohol or drugs? You know, Solomon said, I'm going to feel better. I'm going to cheer myself up. I'm going to forget all my problems. I'm going to do it with wine. And I've always, I hate to say I find it humorous, but there is a little bit of humor in it when Solomon writes in the book of Proverbs about the effects of wine. I mean, he was writing from experience, you know, the things that he talks about there. And when you go over into Proverbs chapter 23, you'll read about how he talks about, you know, you'll get into fights. It'll just cause you quarrels. You know, it'll cause women to look good. And then when you wake up, you're in trouble. And he said it's like you're laying in the middle of the sea, and you're laying on top of the mast of a ship. You don't have any concept of danger. He talks about some of the perverse things that he uttered, you know, while he had drank wine. And then in the very last of that chapter, he talks about, you know, you get up and you seek it again, the addiction of it. And so he tried the wine. Did that work? Didn't work. So what did he do next? Yeah, building projects. You know, we've read about some of these projects that Solomon was involved in, and you know, when you read about them, they display all his great wealth, his genius, everything, his imagination. No cost was spared in building all these things. And after you build these glorious buildings, I mean, what do you do with the landscape around it? Just go leave it like it is? No, Solomon said it had to build these elaborate gardens, you know, these vineyards, and then you got all this landscaping, and what do you need to keep it alive? Got to have water. So he built these elaborate systems of water, you know, these large lakes, these aqueducts, all these amazing things. And then what do you got to have to take care of the grounds? Yeah, you got to have servants, right? And then what do you got to have if you're going to have servants? You got to have food, because you got to feed them, right? And where are you going to get that food? Well, you got to have a farm, right? So he has all this land and all these farms and all this cattle, and he's amassed all the greatest of everything that a person could even think of. You know, when we study Solomon, it's hard to even imagine the life of wealth and luxury and power that he lived. It just blows your mind, doesn't it? But Solomon tried the best of everything. Well, what do you do if you like women? You marry 1,000 of them, right? And so he had 1,000 women at his beck and call. Was Solomon satisfied? Did that fill the void? No. And one of the things he talks about there in verse 10, he never said no. He never said no to himself. Regardless of what the cost was, regardless of how elaborate it was, regardless of how much he already had, he never said no to himself. And that was the great experiment that he was conducted. And so what conclusion did he reach? Yeah, it's all vanity. It's like chasing the wind, right? Can't catch the wind. So he couldn't get pleasure from all these things. Nothing meant anything. If you read chapter 7 and verse 14, it talks about how God has designed good things and bad things to happen to us in this life. And one of the things that we have to understand is, if we expect the bad to happen along with the good, it kind of makes life a little easier. There's some things that it can do for us. And Solomon in this pursuit kind of discovered this idea. But I want to get over to the end here in chapter 12. And of course, in chapter 12 and verse 1, Solomon says, "Remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth, while the evil days come not, when the years draw nigh, when thou shalt say, I shall have no pleasure with them." Why is it important for us to remember God when we're young? Okay?
Also, it gives a good foundation for us to build on as we grow and mature.
Yeah. Yeah. And generally, as you get older, things get easier or harder? Harder, right? It's generally easier to do things when you're younger. When you get older, and I'm learning this as I go here, but when you get older, can you do the same things that you did when you were young? Do you do the same things? Why not?
You got smarter,
Part of it is your physical body won't let you, and part of it is we're wise enough to know that it doesn't pay. I mean, it doesn't gain you to rush through the day working so hard when it'll be there the next day.
Yeah. The things that appeal to you when you're younger are not necessarily the same things that appeal to you when you're older. And some of it is wisdom. Some of it is you just can't do what you used to do. Can't operate like that. And
Lose your desire to do some of those things.
do what?
You lose your desire to do
Yeah.
some of those things.
Yeah, the things that appeal to you just don't mean the same thing, right?
My mom always says, do the things you want to do when you're young. I mean, because you won't want to do them, then you'll miss out.
Yeah. And so,
That might sound bad, but I'm not saying well.
so the idea is, keep your mind on God while you're young. Keep focused on your Creator while you're young. And Solomon is writing, of course, he's well advanced in years now, and he's really writing to those who are miles behind him, but it's the lesson of life. I mean, as you grow older, don't you look back on your life and say, man, if I'd only knew that then. And then you talk to somebody and you try to impart that wisdom to them. Listen, here's the mistakes that I made, and if you'll do this, it will help you turn out better. That's Solomon. That's the book of Ecclesiastes. So his conclusion is, remember God when you're young. Start when you're young. Focus on God when you're young. And the only thing, verse 13, the only thing that's going to bring meaning to life is what? The only thing that's going to fill that hole in your heart is what?
Keep His commandments.
Fear God and keep His commandments. And what does that mean?
That means that that's the whole duty of man, right there.
Yeah, that's the whole of man. That's what life is all about. That's what gives your life purpose and meaning, right? You want to fill the hole in your heart, the void in your heart? Fear God, respect God, do what God says.
3 times throughout his book there, and you said he's older now. He said, gift of God. He used that twice. The 3rd time he said, do this, enjoy at this time. If we take that in, Paul said it about himself. He was satisfied wherein you're called. That's how he was able to do it. And if we can truly forget about what everybody thinks we ought to be, and be satisfied with who we are, what we are, because we're in God's beginning.
Yeah, and that's one of the emphasis there, like you said in the end of chapter 9 in verses 10 and 11. Solomon's talking about youth, but he says enjoy your youth. Have fun, enjoy life, but remember, God's going to bring you into judgment for everything you do. And so keep that in mind and in focus, and that's really the point of life. Again, honoring God and doing what He says. So